Hill figures have existed in England for at least 3,000 years. Today, we're going to visit the largest and the most mysterious of them all, the Long Man of Wilmington. It's believed by some to represent an ancient pagan fertility god, and that's partly due to its location. But things aren't always as they seem. Here, on the South Downs in southern England, there was a huge amount of prehistoric activity. Stone Age and Bronze Age burial grounds appear in close clusters up on these chalk hills. This area was a sacred place for thousands of years. The mystique of the landscape has become a part of the Long Man story. Let's go and investigate. I'm making my way up to the Long Man now, but we have to pass through the village of Wilmington. Wilmington is an Old English name, and it means the village of clouds, which, as you can see today, doesn't really fit. It's not a cloud in the sky. There are two sides to the Long Man. There are the legends, the local lore, and then there's the historic side and the archaeological side, which we'll be exploring both of those today, because they're both as important as each other. Now, a little warning, there will be quite a few ifs, buts, and maybes. But anybody who talks about the Long Man with absolute certainty is probably deceiving themselves in doing so, because the reality is we just don't know everything. But I'm going to put it all out there on the table, and you can make up your own minds as to what you think this mysterious figure is and what it represents. Sussex is an abbreviation of the words South Saxons. The South Saxons were the last kingdom on mainland England to convert to Christianity. So there's this prevailing idea that Sussex has a bit of a spooky past. And that belief is enforced by some of the unusual things that can be found in this church. So this is the Wilmington Yew. It's 1,600 years old, according to some estimates. This would have seen the collapse of the Roman Empire in Britain. This would have seen the coming of the Anglo-Saxons, the reconversion to Christianity. This tree would have stood through it all, if the estimations are to be believed, because yew trees are notoriously hard to date. Many of Britain's ancient yews appear in churchyards like this, and there isn't really a satisfying answer for that. There's a few folk explanations which don't actually stand up when pitted against historical sources. Some people like to believe that yew trees mark the site of old druidic sites of worship, but there's actually no evidence that yew trees were sacred to the ancient druids. Plus, in our timeline, in 400 AD, there would have been no druids left in this part of England, so it just doesn't add up. Another explanation is that the yew trees were planted to stop livestock from coming into the graveyard, because this is poisonous to animals and to people. Look at these chains, this great big iron chain holding the tree up, stopping it from basically tearing itself apart. And these struts are also here to stop the tree from ripping itself apart, which would be a real shame. Inside the church, there's also another mysterious object that I want to show you before we head up to see the Long Man. And like I said, this all adds to the Long Man's mystery. This is an absolutely stunning church. It's a Norman church. It was built in the 12th century. There was also a priory here, which is important to bear in mind for later. But for now, let's have a look at this object that's caused so much intrigue. Here it is. This is the Wilmington Madonna, and I wanted to read what it said about this in the guidebook, but all the guidebooks have run out. But luckily for you guys, I have a previous clip of me reading this out from an older video. An earlier date for this carving is not improbable, there she is, and could suggest a connection with some pagan fertility god. So what do you think? If the church guide is saying it, does that give it some credibility, at least? The mother and child obviously has some ties to fertility, if you were to look at it through that lens of it being a pagan icon. It's a nice idea, and it's not one we can actually disprove, because you can't date stone in the same way that you could with organic material, for example. So it could be. It seems quite unlikely that a 12th century Norman or English craftsman would have got hold of a pre-Christian icon and put it in a church, but you never know. And this just adds to the idea that the Long Man is also a symbol of this fertility cult. Now, I don't want this to feel like I'm myth-busting here. That's really not my intention. But I'm just laying out what the beliefs are about these things, and also what the reality is. Both are just as interesting, and both are valuable. There's an excellent story about a farmer in Wilmington called George Page. He had a cow called Bluebell, and the BBC made a documentary, a radio show about this cow called Bluebell. And Bluebell was incredibly productive. So she had 32 calves, 3 sets of twins, and she produced 8 gallons of milk per day, which is double of what a cow usually produces. When the BBC asked the farmer what was behind this, he claimed that it was the Long Man of Wilmington, and that Bluebell was grazing in the pasture within sight of the Long Man, and through some sort of power of fertility, the Long Man had given Bluebell this incredible gift to produce calves and milk. The farmer then went on to say that babies that are born in Wilmington were big and strong and healthy, and that people lived until their 90s. In a strange and slightly ironic twist, Bluebell ate some deadly nightshade before the show could air, and she died before the show went live. So the giant couldn't save her from eating the poisonous nightshade. So the farmer in our story was born in the 1890s, and rural communities often hold on to folk tales more than people in the city would, and they lean towards being slightly more superstitious. And I've just come into view of the Long Man now. There it is, up on the hilltop. I was worried we weren't going to see it because it's so dry here, but it's such a prevalent marker. Look at it. It's hard to get a sense of the scale, really, from back here. The Long Man, unlike other hill figures in Britain, it's not carved into the chalk. So in Britain, we've also got the Uffington White Horse, which is the oldest. It's roughly 3,000 years old. And then we've got the Cerne Abbas Giant, which is probably the most recognisable because of some of his more prominent features. Then we've got the Long Man, which is the tallest and probably the most misunderstood, the most confusing, and the most mysterious. Until the 2000s, we really had no idea how old the Long Man was. An archaeological survey told us that the Long Man isn't a pagan fertility symbol at all. It isn't an Anglo-Saxon symbol or a Roman god. It actually comes from the Tudor period, and we can trace the exact decade to the 1550s. Unlike the Uffington White Horse or the Cerne Abbas Giant, which are carved into the hillside, exposing the chalk underneath, the Long Man was originally made out of red Tudor bricks, and archaeologists were able to determine its age by digging a trench just below the figure's feet and getting to that bottom level where the bricks were first laid and analysing the soil, and they could check for when it was last exposed to sunlight, and that's what gives us our date of 1550. And it was the same technique which was used on the Uffington White Horse and the Cerne Abbas Giant. So if we believe the dates of those, then we have to believe the date of the Long Man, as much as it might bewilder us and not make sense. People were either expecting it to be from the ancient world, like the Uffington White Horse, or to be a relatively modern construction. And this is because it doesn't actually appear in the historical records until the early 1700s. And it is strange that for nearly 200 years, nobody mentioned the Long Man in any surveys or charters until a man called John Rowley did a drawing of it. And this is that drawing. Now, this doesn't look much like the Long Man today. You can see the resemblance. It's got features, it's got eyes, it's got a mouth. It seems to be squatter, and it's got this really strange helmet type thing around the head. That's not really where the confusion ends. 50 years later, an antiquarian named William Burrell came here and did a drawing of the Long Man too. And this is that drawing. You can see the figure's got a scythe and a rake. It's got headgear on, like the first drawing, but it's much more detailed. And this is where it's really confusing. William Burrell was a serious academic and antiquarian. And it's strange that there's such a big discrepancy in the two drawings. And if you fast forward again to our next drawing of the Long Man, it comes another 50 or so years later. And you can see here that the figure is almost completely lost to the earth. So the brick was starting to disintegrate, the grass was growing over it, and the figure was almost completely lost to the earth. It was only visible under certain conditions. The light had to be striking it a certain way. If the grass perhaps hadn't been grazed on and it was a bit longer and perhaps more overgrown. So as you can see from this drawing, the figure was fading fast. So in the Victorian era, it was decided that they should restore the monument. So what they did is they laid yellow bricks down around the outline. They tried to trace it as well as they could, even though the bricks were disintegrating. And this is the shape of the Long Man that we get today. Tourists would come and visit the Long Man, and they started taking these yellow bricks home as souvenirs. So it was decided in the 60s that the bricks would be replaced with concrete and painted white. I suppose probably to fit in with the other chalk figures, but originally it would have been red. It's been yellow. It's also been green. It was painted green during the Second World War so that German bombers couldn't use it as a way to navigate. One of the most baffling things is the first two drawings that we have. Why does one depict him with a scythe and a rake and in much more detail than the first? Surely the first drawing was earlier and therefore the image would have been clearer. But as we learn from the Victorian accounts, certain conditions made the Long Man either more or less visible. So it's possible that these two men, John Rowley saw his when the Long Man was particularly difficult to see, and that William Burrell saw his on a good day. Something else that we have to consider is that William Burrell, again, was a serious scholar. Now, it's plausible that this idea of the Long Man being a pagan fertility god would have been around in the 1750s. Seems likely that it would have been. So possibly he was filling in the gaps with his imagination. Some of his work is in the British Museum. A lot of his peers really respected his work. So I think that both drawings are honest representations of what the men saw. And I think that Burrell's drawing is probably the closest to what the Long Man is meant to look like. Probably. Let me know what you think. Like I said, a lot of this is open to interpretation. Just behind me, I can see the top of Wilmington Church, and I can also see the Wilmington Yew. If Burrell's drawing is the most accurate, then what's it meant to represent? This is just a question which no one can answer honestly. But it certainly seems to be something to do with agriculture. It's not a million miles away from the folk belief of it being a pagan fertility god. And look at this landscape. And the reason why there are so many Neolithic sites here on the South Downs is because this farmland was incredibly fertile and it was incredibly treasured. So Neolithic people would build their graves on sites like this. It was a way of marking ownership. This is where my ancestor is buried. This is rightfully our land. And there are also very prominent features in the landscape here. You can see the remnants of some Neolithic activity, which I'll show you when we get to the top, because it's very interesting. If this drawing is the most accurate, then we have to ask ourselves, what is it? What's it meant to represent? And the honest answer is, we just don't know. It might be a self-portrait of the man who farmed this field. Some have suggested that it's the depiction of some Protestant martyrs who were taken to London and put on the rack because of their beliefs. They were tried about 10 miles that way, within sight of the Long Man, I suppose. But the issue with that is, to me, that doesn't look like somebody who's on a rack. Somebody who would be on a rack, their arms would be up in the air. This is clearly somebody holding something. Another folk belief is that the Long Man is the entranceway to some sort of other realm and he's pushing doors apart. There's a TV show called The Sandman on Netflix which shows that. I've not seen the episode, but I was actually in it. I did a little cameo as a faun, and I bet a lot of people watching this would have first been introduced to the Long Man by that Sandman episode. We're going to head up to the top now. This is Windover Hill. It's pretty blustery, as you can see. And I'm going to tell you some more of the folkloric stories surrounding the Long Man. The Long Man has also had a few temporary changes since the 1960s concreting. It was turned into the Long Woman of Wilmington in an episode of Trinny and Susanna, as you can see from this image. This caused quite a lot of upset amongst neo-pagans who hold this site to be sacred. In 2019, somebody put a face mask on the giant as well. But those are only temporary. And now it looks exactly how it would have looked after the 1960s restoration, if you want to call it that. I don't really think it's a restoration, since it doesn't look much like the original. The restorations in themselves become a part of the site, so it's hard to say at what point we should try and return to, if indeed the William Burrell drawing is the most accurate. I just don't know what that could possibly be. I think it may have some cultural significance which we just no longer understand. Some people have suggested that the Long Man is a depiction of a pilgrim who would have been visiting the priory, and that it may have been the monks who carved it, but Wilmington Priory was disbanded before the Long Man was built. The Long Man has had a few different names over the years. He was called the Green Man sometimes because his outline was largely grown over with grass. He's also called the Wilmington Giant. Giants are very prominent in folklore around the world, and England is no exception. Famously, Jack the Giant Slayer, Jack-o'-legs. And there was a medieval myth written by Geoffrey of Monmouth, who is largely responsible for our modern conception of King Arthur, wrote that there was a race of giants who lived in Albion, as he called it, that were here before the first men arrived. Their leader was Gogmagog. And there was once a carving of Gogmagog in Cambridge, which has since been lost. It was grown over, and we don't know how old the carving of Gogmagog was. It might have been carved in the Tudor period, some people believe, but it may have been older. We just don't know. It's been lost to the earth. And there are roughly 40 lost hill figures in Britain, which is an astonishing amount when you think about it. Some may have been truly ancient, like the Uffington White Horse. I think it's such a shame that they were lost. Before the scientists and archaeologists and even historians began trying to understand the Long Man, the local people tried to understand it in whatever way they could. And there's a story which goes that up here on Windover Hill, there was a giant who the local people called the Long Man. The locals were afraid to come up to the hilltop because the giant had a taste for human flesh, as most giants do. So they would avoid coming up here. And that meant that they couldn't graze their flocks on the best grassland. Until one day, a shepherd decided that he was going to risk it. So he brought his flock right up here to the top of the hill to graze them. And it wasn't long until the Long Man caught up with him, picked him up, and was about to swallow him whole, when the shepherd said to him, "Before you eat me, why don't you have a little starter? I've got a wheel of cheese for you to eat." And the giant had never eaten cheese before, only livestock and people. And so he agreed. He thought, well, I'll have this little appetizer and then I'll eat the shepherd as my main. And so the shepherd produced a wheel of cheese and he gave it to the giant. And it was the most delicious thing that the giant had ever eaten. And the shepherd saw this and he said to him, "If you eat me now, then you'll never get to eat cheese again. But if you let me go, then I can bring you cheese every day and you can eat as much cheese as you like." So the giant agreed. And the shepherd would bring the giant as much cheese as he liked. And he left their livestock alone. And the village became kind of friendly with him. Now there was another giant who lived on Firle Beacon, which is that hilltop just over there. And he'd seen what the Long Man was up to, and he didn't like it. Giants and people were not meant to be friends. So he took a huge boulder and he threw it right across the valley at the Long Man, just missing the Long Man's head by an inch. These horses don't have the Long Man to worry about anymore. And the Long Man, seeing this stone whiz past him, decided he wasn't going to let that slide. So he looked around him for a rock. He couldn't find any, but he had an idea. He began burrowing his giant hands into the hilltop, deep down into the earth, until he found a boulder of his own, and he threw it back across the valley. And it didn't take long until stones were flying, until the Firle Beacon giant hit the mark, and he hit the Long Man in the head and sent the Long Man tumbling down the hill. He had slain the Long Man. And the villagers saw that the Long Man was lying lifeless on the hill, and they traced his outline, and that is how the Long Man of Wilmington came to be. Then the villagers took the giant's body They dragged it back up to the top of the hill and they buried him here in what's known as the Giant's Grave. This is a Neolithic tumulus, so a barrow, a burial mound. And somebody, historically speaking, of very high status would have been buried here around 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. What a setting. You can see there the English Channel in the distance. It's shining. I feel like I can almost see France in this weather. Some cattle here, free to graze, now that the Long Man is no more. And you see this great pit in the earth, one of the holes which the giant dug his hand into to retrieve stones from the earth. These are Neolithic flint mines. Flint was very important to Neolithic people because it's what they built their tools out of. The tools themselves seem to have had a spiritual significance because they're often buried along with the dead. So I think that just about covers the mysteries of the Long Man, his possible origins. It's probably raised more questions than it's answered. And I hope you enjoyed that tale as well. It's amazing how much these stories are imprinted on the landscape. Let me know what you think the Long Man might represent, if you have any ideas about its possible origins. And if there are any stories near you, please let me know because I'm always on the lookout. I'm going to make my way down the hill now. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will catch you next time.